life and belief conflicts. Hands up all those to whom it has never happened. Oh good. Just one. Just one. Okay. If I just took it from personal experience, I don't think I would get through much of it today. But if you were expecting a continuation from last Sunday morning, I do apologise that I do not have any images of bikini-clad ladies to show you. Although I must confess that if you're just listening to this later on, there was a very good point to be made.
There was.
About
Thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
There was.
But today, this is for the fully clothed. Okay? It's also for the very well-read, for the educated, for the intelligent. You're dropping out already. For the erudite. Okay?
It lost me now.
What I mean is, some round here, some at the back there, one over here. Okay. Can you identify these for me, please?
Pumba and Timon.
Yes.
Right. Pumba is not too bright, by the way. He is not one of the erudite. He says lines like this, which I think is choice. At times like this, buddy, you just got to put your behind in your past. Choice. And they have a song. The song is
Hakuna Matata.
Hakuna Matata. Right. Johnny's going to teach us this. No? Oh well. We can hope.
It was our next worship.
Here are the words just in case he changes his mind. Hakuna Matata. What a wonderful phrase. Hakuna Matata ain't no passing craze. It means no worries for the rest of your days. It's our problem-free philosophy. Hakuna Matata. If you can imagine Jesus walking along the Sea of Galilee and he calls Andrew, Peter, James and John and he says to them, come on boys, you follow me and the rest of your life will be Hakuna Matata. Ha! As if 4 years ago next weekend I was in London at a college reunion and our morning prayers on the Saturday were to be led by a couple called Malcolm and Stephanie. They had spent 48 years as Salvation Army officers. During that time they had lost a son to cystic fibrosis, but during that prayer time Malcolm was not able to participate. In his retirement he still works part-time for the Salvation Army at their national headquarters in London. And one afternoon, I think it was a Thursday or the Wednesday before we met, he was coming out, crossing the road, and a cyclist coming at speed knocked him over and damaged him quite severely. Broke some of his bones, fractured his jaw, and he didn't come round until later that night in the hospital. Stephanie, however, carried on doing the prayer time, and she said, you know, throughout your life you have expectations, you have dreams, you have aspirations, and then she used a little phrase that lodged with me ever since, but she says the trouble is, life happens. Life happens. Hakuna Matata, no worries? Not really, because, let's face it, life just sucks sometimes, doesn't it? It just does. In the Old Testament, there's a character called Job. Apparently this book of Job was the first written, predates Genesis. But he subscribed to an ancient belief that if you do good, then you get blessed. And if you don't, well, you get punished. The problem with Job is he hadn't done anything wrong. Yet he was suffering. It says in the opening chapters, the opening verse of Job, that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. Life and his belief had collided big time. And one of the things that he has to put up with is a visit from God's little helpers. We've all met them one time or another, haven't we? It's a visit he could really have done without. And each one is allowed to say their piece as to why they think Job is going what he's going through. But the odd thing is, God does not speak. He doesn't say anything for quite some time. And sometimes that can be pretty difficult. There are parts of Scripture where there are long, long silences, and I can only assume that either God has nothing to say or there's nobody listening to speak to. And eventually, after a long wait, God speaks, but he only addresses Job. He doesn't address the other four. And in addressing him, he corrects him. Melanie. Thank you.
Job 38, 1-7. Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. He said, "Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy?"
Who is this with words without knowledge? Some of the conflicts of faith are due to our own limitations. Due to the fact that we don't quite know as much sometimes as we think we do. Job's friends were not right in what they said, but neither was Job. And one of the things that Job has to do is to examine his own belief. Now, I have met quite a lot of people who have been damaged by all I can describe as contrived doctrines. A little bit like the Gruffalo. It's made up as it's gone along, and then suddenly it comes back to face them and they cannot handle it. And sometimes examining our beliefs can be demanding and it can be challenging. It's the fear sometimes of questioning long-held doctrines and beliefs as if we're questioning God. One thing Job never does is question God, even though his image of God is somewhat skewed. And yet the prophet Isaiah says we're invited to do that. He says, come on, let's reason together. If you look through other translations, it's even more blunt than that, because look, let's sit down and talk this thing through, because that's going to involve some listening. The world's a bit of a mess, isn't it, really? When you think of the situation in Ukraine, I don't think that being voted top of the Eurovision Song Contest is quite the victory they were looking for, but it was good to see it. I want to introduce you to a guy called Philip Yancey. My great envy of this man is his hair. He is one of the best-selling contemporary Christian authors of the past 30 to 40 years. He is very prolific, he is very popular, but please note I said popular and not populist. Populist writers tend to go for the money, and what they deliver, even with a Christian base, is nothing short of spiritual cellulite. It's just all volume and no real value. Yancey, however, addresses some very crucial issues, and sometimes he addresses things that other people would prefer were left alone. I really cannot recommend him high enough. He's not a theologian, but my word, he makes a good hand at it. 1977, he wrote a book called Where is God When It Hurts? He updated that book in 1990, and in 2013, 36 years after the original, he wrote another book. Not just one more book, he'd written a lot in between, and that was called The Question That Never Goes Away. And the question that never goes away is, where is God when it hurts? So really he is addressing the same question under the guise of another question. And in the light of greater experience for him, he revisits the perpetual question of where is God when it hurts? If you watched the news yesterday, another shooting. I think yesterday's news says at least 10 people dead in a supermarket in a predominantly black area in New York State. Where is God when stuff like that happens? In some of Yancey's books he addresses things like that. But listen to what he does write in one of them. Whilst writing articles on real-life dramas for Reader's Digest, he was profiling people who had survived tragedy. Again and again I heard from my interview subjects, you might not like this, Christians made it worse. By offering contradictory and confusing counsel. God is punishing you. No, it's Satan. Neither. God has afflicted you out of love, not punishment, for you have been specially selected to demonstrate faith. No, God wants you healed. We've all heard them. We've all heard them. We've all suffered from them at times. Yet, despite what he says, I mean, that is written a long, long time ago. Despite what he says, what he doesn't underestimate is the value of other people. Value of other people who can step into our lives at the right time. Thinking of that shooting yesterday, there have been several shootings in America in schools. He attended some of these, after the event of course, and he saw the pain. He saw the questioning. He saw others as well, who brought into that kind of situation the very presence of God. Not in words necessarily, but in just being there and being alongside people when they needed it. See, despite Job's experience, when belief and life collide, we should not underestimate the genuine friends that come alongside. I arrived home before Margaret a couple of Sundays ago, and I'd been at another church, and when she came in the house, she went up the kitchen door and she said, she'd been talking to somebody, and she said, I feel as if I've just had a sedative. Oh, yeah. When God does come close, especially in times of conflict, and particularly in times when faith conflicts, he draws near us most often in human form. Sometimes it's unrecognised. Now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus,
about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther, but they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them, assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread.
When we have faced conflicts between life and faith, those things that we believe and something that may have happened, where is it that we have turned to? What is the recourse that we take? A few Sundays ago, for every thing that Matt said, Jack put his hand up and said, "Prayer." You remember? Yep. But praying when there is conflict is not polite praying. It's not, dare I say it, public praying. I would not like you to hear my praying in private, believe you me. Sometimes it is far, far, far from polite, but it has to result in some honest dialogue to and fro between us and God. Do we resort to solitude? This would be one of my recourses. Place where there are no interruptions. Thinking things through, but also listening. Are we prepared to wait? Sometimes we want an answer straight away, don't we? We're all smitten with impatience one way or another. Time to wait to discover that so often there is a greater wisdom in God than we have tapped into. Do we go back to rereading those scriptures that maybe we have held and sometimes they are not quite saying what we think? Just to have a look again to see what it actually says. I have lost count of the times when I've done that. And I have found myself in the place of Job where God is actually correcting me through what's already written. What about others? People chosen with care. People who listen. People who will be honest and not just tell us the things that we want to hear. One fundamental belief is that God promises to dwell among us. He promised to dwell among his people. And he ultimately fulfilled that promise in Jesus. And yet there were those who missed him. And we wouldn't want that to happen this morning. If God is here among us, if God needs to encounter you in the Spirit of Jesus, then please don't miss it. You remember the limitations of the disciples how easily they could have missed him. Walking that Emmaus Road, they didn't even recognise him until later on. Matt reminded us a few weeks ago in the introduction to this series, what were they going through on Good Friday? They were hurting. And if you permit the phrase, they were hurting like hell. And I don't believe for a moment that Peter was the only one who cried. Thomas had been missing for a week. Where'd he been? Don't know. But where was God when they were hurting? Listen to this from Philip Yancey again. He says, faith, I've concluded, means believing in advance what will only make sense in reverse. We look back and the light comes on. The penny drops. Call it what you like. It makes sense in reverse. He was made known to them. It dawned on them afterwards just who this was who had drawn near and had opened the scriptures to them to tell them what they thought they knew. Let's take time for that to happen this morning.